All right, let's open the case file on what might be one of the biggest and yet quietest mysteries of our time. The case of the empty cradle. All around the world, something strange is happening. Birth rates are just falling off a cliff, and we need to figure out why civilization's most fundamental act seems to be grinding to a halt.
And the stakes here could not be higher. This is not some far-off academic problem. When you have people from all walks of life sounding alarms this loud, we're not just talking about boring statistics. We're talking about a potential crisis on a civilizational level. So let's follow the evidence and see where it leads.
So where does our investigation begin? Well, it starts with a demographic shockwave, one that's arriving a whole lot sooner than anyone ever expected.
For the longest time, this was a problem for, our grandkids to worry about. Something for the distant future. But that timeline, it's been shredded. We're now on track to hit this critical tipping point where more people are dying than are being born within this decade. The entire balance is shifting way faster than any of the models predicted. This really isn't a drill.
Okay, so let's get to the cold, hard evidence. To really get what's going on, we have to understand the one key metric at the heart of this entire mystery.
Everything, and I mean everything, comes down to this number, 2.1. That's the magic number. It's what a society needs for the population to stay stable, to just replace itself, not even grow. 2 kids to replace 2 parents, plus that little 0.1 to make up for mortality and people who don't have kids. So remember that number, 2.1.
And this slide just lays out the problem with brutal clarity. Just look at the gap between that 2.1 replacement rate and where we actually are. South Korea is at a mind-blowing 0.68. That means each new generation is less than a third the size of the one before it. And economic powerhouses like China and the US, they're not even close. These aren't just numbers on a chart. They represent millions and millions of missing births.
And this isn't some recent dip either. It's a free fall in slow motion that's been happening for decades. Think about it. In the lifetime of our grandparents, the global average was 5 children per woman. 5. Now we're just barely hovering above that replacement rate globally, and honestly, the only reason it's that high is because of high fertility regions in places like Africa. The developed world is already deep, deep in decline.
So, what is going on? What's causing this? Well, like any good investigation, let's start by rounding up the usual suspects, the explanations that everyone points to first.
And here they are. And they probably sound pretty familiar, right? It costs an absolute fortune to own a home, the cost of just raising a kid is astronomical, and at the same time, women are, as they should be, getting more educated and building incredible careers, which often means having kids later in life, or maybe not at all. These are huge, undeniable forces. So, case closed, right? Well, not so fast.
Because here's the plot twist. Governments see these problems. They've identified the suspects. They have thrown billions, literally billions of dollars at trying to fix it. Tax breaks, huge cash bonuses, cheap loans, you name it. And the results? A tiny, temporary bump at best. Or, in the case of South Korea, they've spent over $30 billion with almost nothing to show for it. The fact that all this money is failing tells us that while those usual suspects are part of the story, they can't be the whole story. We must be missing something.
So, it's time to look beyond the obvious. It turns out our case file has a hidden clue, and this one might just change everything we thought we knew. And this is the question that completely flips the investigation on its head. We've been looking at the economics, at the sociology, but what if there's a biological angle to this, a suspect that's been hiding in plain sight, or maybe more accurately, hiding inside of us? Just take a look at this number for a second. 100%. What on earth could possibly have a 100% prevalence in the entire human population?
This might be the smoking gun. In every single human semen and testes sample that was tested in major recent studies, scientists found microplastics. Not in some of them, in all of them, 100%. We are literally saturated with these tiny particles.
And please, don't think this is just some harmless contamination. No way. It lines up with a pretty terrifying biological crisis. Global sperm counts have plummeted by over 60% since the early 1970s. This drop happened right as all these endocrine-disrupting chemicals, things like BPA and PFS, became common. And here's the kicker. It's not just a male problem. They're now finding microplastics in female ovarian fluid too. The science is still new, but all the arrows are pointing to a massive systemic attack on the very building blocks of human reproduction. So what happens when you combine those immense economic pressures not to have kids with this new, terrifying biological evidence? Well, the verdict for our future starts to look incredibly bleak.
The future we were all promised in the 20th century was one of nonstop growth and expansion. But the future we're actually creating? It's the complete opposite. It's a future of collapse and contraction, a shrinking workforce of young people trying to support a massive, aging population, economic stagnation, the fundamental math of how our societies work, it just breaks.
And I mean, just look at these projections for the end of the century. They are staggering. China might lose more than half its population. Half! Countries like Italy, Japan, Poland, they could see their population shrink by a third or even half. This isn't just a minor adjustment, it's a complete demographic redrawing of the world map.
This quote, it paints such a chillingly clear picture. It warns that our future could be one where the entire Western world becomes essentially a nursing home with no nurses, a society with more elderly people needing care than there are young people to provide it. It's a future of ghost towns, empty schools, and strained societies.
Which leaves us with this one final, really haunting question. When you combine our economic choices with the unseen pollutants flooding our bodies, have we, completely by accident, started to engineer our own disappearance? This case is far from closed. In fact, it feels like it's just beginning.